To all travelers, what is your creepiest hotel story? Years ago, I was on a cross-country trip, solo, to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but there was horrible weather, and it was slow going. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted, in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off a fairly remote state road. It was obviously small and dirty but would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where the check-in was. The guy there eyed me up, then a college-aged girl, and asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my ID and credit card, but he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I scrounged together just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty, barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom, then I flipped up the mattress. It was dirty, with signs of bed bugs. A moment later, I spied a cockroach. That was it, I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least, and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside, and glanced out to see the guy from check-in standing outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call, then walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later, he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing, with another guy. I hadn't seen guy 2 enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered in the back seat, but between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The 2 guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more, the one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up the SUV. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but didn't want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had closed down only days before I called. I was visiting NYC with my wife and 1-year-old. My brother had made the hotel reservation for us, and we thought it would be nice. We arrived and checked in, and then found our way to our room. The hallways were a maze and it took us a few minutes to find our room. The room was pretty sketchy, but it was late and we were tired, so we started to settle in. My wife had brought a quart of milk for our kid, and since the room didn't have a fridge, she asked me to take it to the front desk and ask them if they had a fridge we could use. I took the milk and headed into the maze/hallway. I got a bit turned around but eventually found the elevator. I got in, hit the L button, and rode the elevator down. When the door opened at the lobby, I was met with a dark, narrow hallway. I stupidly stepped out, confused as to what was going on. There were several doors on both sides of the hallway, but all were locked. I walked down the hallway and eventually started to hear music playing. After a couple of minutes, I turned a corner and almost ran into 2 big guys. I stopped and stared at them, wondering what the hell was going on. One of the 2, after looking me up and down and pausing on the milk I was carrying, asked me, "What are you doing here?" I just stared for a few seconds and said, "I'm just trying to find the lobby." He then escorted me to the entrance of what turned out to be a strip club. After exiting, I saw the hotel about half a block up the street. Apparently, I took the elevator that the strippers would take with paying clients and had no idea. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone for a few minutes. I stayed in a bed and breakfast once, but it was a basement room. I had to be in by 10:30 p.m., and as the tenants were a little off, I went down early and said goodnight to the couple. As I reached the bottom step, I heard a click of a key in a lock. I went back up the stairs and checked the door and yep, it was locked tight. I knocked quietly and softly called out, but no one replied, though I could hear movement and what sounded briefly like laughing. I then phoned the bed and breakfast in the hope of someone answering, and an answering machine picked up. I felt stupid and hung up. My prison for the night was very basic and small, with a sink, a cot, and a portable heater from a place that time forgot. And lots of frames on the walls but, oddly, no pictures. I went to bed but not before I put a small obstacle course between my single corner bed and the steps. In the morning, when I awoke, the door was slightly ajar. I dressed and went up for breakfast, a little annoyed and creeped out. I felt like trust had been violated and maybe my rights had been infringed. The food was already ready, so I ate it, and as no one was around, I went to pay. The landlady was very nonchalant and still a bit odd, and when I mentioned the door locking, without looking up she said, it was house rules and no one had complained before. She claimed it was, for safety, as I might be a serial killer or worse. I tactfully asked what would happen if a fire broke out and she said, there were people for that, presumably meaning the firemen who'd rescue me. On a full tummy and on my way out, I realized I'd have to take up this issue online via a review and left. At the time I didn't freak out, but thinking about it all much later, I really worried about being locked in a basement without any way out. Just a sealed door with a key controlled by a couple of oddballs. Maybe they were harmless, but if that door hadn't opened in the morning or the ancient heater had caught fire, who knows? I recently made a trip to Bolivia to see the rainforest and the pampas, fertile lowlands. We took the kids on a nice jungle adventure. We were staying in a nice hut on a river for a few days, making excursions into the jungle. On day 3, our guide asked if we wanted to trek to a campsite and sleep in the jungle. We went for it. We trekked in for 4 hours through super cool, dense jungle and encountered beautiful birds, wild pigs, snakes, and the coolest plants and trees ever. Ants and cool bugs crawled everywhere you looked. As usual, though, mosquitoes and staying dry were the only challenges. We eventually found the camp, which consisted of plywood rectangles raised up on what seemed like sawhorses. Each person gets a little mat which is surrounded by mosquito netting. After dinner, we were talking about the massive spiders, poisonous, of course, on the screens inside the dinner area, which were about 3 to 4 inches in diameter. Their prominent eyes lit up in the light of my flashlight, and they definitely seemed to be observing us. The guide reminded us to shake out our clothing the next morning to make sure they hadn't crawled into your shirt or something. He said, "Oh, those spiders are nothing. Last season, we had some Germans that stayed here and the next morning they were complaining about animals creeping around the raised plywood beds during the night." He said the next morning he found jaguar footprints all around the sleeping area from what looked like an adult. They can reach over 200 pounds. Needless to say, I went to sleep with one eye open. I stayed awake as long as I could until exhaustion turned to, okay, I'm too tired. If you want to eat me, then make it quick. I just can't care any longer. I remember the distinct feeling that I was going to be dragged off into the jungle in the middle of the night and that this was a jaguar meat market with little meals in nice little netted areas prepared for their selection. Not the best night's sleep. You can bet the next morning the first thing I did was spring up and inspect around the raised beds for jaguar footprints. From her mosquito net meat case, my wife tuned into my inspection of the area and followed me with her eyes. I didn't really have to explain anything to her. When it was over, we exchanged knowing glances and I simply said, nope. We were relieved but remained exhausted all day from a stressed-out lack of sleep. As a joke, I shook out my shirt and said, and I bet there's a giant spider who slept in my shirt. Almost on command, a huge spider whipped out of my shirt and hit the ground. I still remember the plopping sound it made as it hit the dirt and creepily scurried off for cover. I found another, equally sized monster in my pants that were left on the raised platform just outside my mosquito net. That was almost 4 months ago, and even though we're back at home, I still find myself shaking out my shoes each morning to check for unwanted intruders, half expecting to hear that plopping sound as one hits the floor. I was in Portland, Oregon, or more accurately right on the outskirts of Portland. I was a freshman in college and on a road trip with a few of my friends. We were splitting everything 5 ways to make the trip extra cheap. Despite this, 2 of my friends on the trip executively decided that the hotel we had all picked was too expensive. It really wasn't when we all split it up, they just weren't thinking about it that way, canceled our reservation there and booked us at the seediest, most remote hotel possible to save a grand total of $10. The trip was already off to a rocky start with the driver refusing to let anyone else split the 14-hour drive with them and speeding at 100 miles per hour because that's how people drive in the big city. Then as soon as we got there, one of us was mugged. We get to our hotel exhausted, frightened, and already worn very thin to find that it's not the nice hotel we booked but the seedy hotel. We're all irritated by this, but we get set up for bed and I decide to call my mom. I didn't want to vent about the horrible trip so far in front of my friends, so I stepped out into the hall and started walking towards the lobby. I'm on the phone with my mom for a grand total of 2 minutes when a drunk dude stumbles down the steps towards me and slurs, "Wow, you're really cute, how old are you?" I try to ignore him, but then he was coming towards me faster and now he was trying to get closer to me, saying, "I don't even mind if you're underage." I scream at him to get away from me and run down the hall with him chasing clumsily after me. I get to the lobby and from the look on my face, the hotel clerk immediately asks me if I need to come behind the desk with her, which was in its own locked room separating her from the guests. I jump behind the desk with her just as this guy is rounding the corner. He tries to play it cool, like he wasn't just running after me, and asks the clerk if they have any extra forks. Very smooth. The clerk tells him they don't and he should return to his room. She convinced me to call the police and they evicted him from his room. What I didn't know at the time was that the clerk had been watching the security cameras when everything happened and had watched him stalk me down the hall, then wait around the corner listening to me talk to my mom on the phone before he approached me. I only found out because I felt a bit bad about him getting booted out into the rain and asked one of the officers if they really thought it was necessary. Fairly spooky, and I have never traveled with that same group ever again. My parents took my sister and me around the US quite a bit when we were young. In Alabama, when I was about 2, we checked into the Heart of Auburn motel after a long day on the road. Once in the room, I immediately turned down one of the 2 double beds to find the pillow completely covered, literally caked, in red. To my mind, this was a horror. My mother saw it as simply a failure of proper housekeeping. She called the front desk, had the sheets and the offending pillow changed, and then tucked me into that same bed. She said someone probably had a nosebleed, but my mind was filled with images of massive head wounds. Much later in life, when my work took me onto several crime scenes, I saw blood splatter and pooling up close. This experience has convinced me someone actually bled out on that motel room pillow in the Heart of Auburn. Not a traveler, but I work in a hotel. We have a room that our housekeepers absolutely refuse to clean alone. They say that when they're alone in the room, things move around when their back is turned. I never put much stock into it until I was working a night shift about 2 years back. A woman called the front desk to say that the person above her was making a lot of noise and she'd like someone to ask them to stop. The people working the front desk that night were all women, and sometimes they just prefer to have a man with them when confronting people, so they asked me to go up with the girl who was going to talk to them. So I'm at the desk while she's looking up the guest's name in the room above. The room is empty, and it's the room the housekeepers won't go in. I remember thinking, that's funny, and relayed the story to the desk agent, who was not all that thrilled with it. So we get to the room to make sure there isn't an error in the system. The room is perfectly empty with everything in place. So we go to the room below to talk to the guest and ask what it was she was hearing. I thought maybe it had been someone running water next door or something. She said it was a very distinct sound. She said if she didn't know any better, she'd say it sounded like someone was dragging chains across the floor. As she's telling us this, we hear it. I kid you not, it sounds like actual chains on the ceiling. I'm running around trying to find the source before it disappears. There are no water lines in the main room, so I head to the bathroom. Nothing. I check all of the lights, and none of the ballasts are buzzing. Above the closet is clear as well. I go into the hallway and there's no sound at all. We went back to the room above, and were later informed that about 30 seconds after we left her room, the guest stopped hearing the noise. We ended up moving her and told her that we'd find the source of the noise before opening the room back up to another guest. The next day I asked my boss about it and he just shivers. This dude is like 60 years old and built like a tank. He's what a greaser turns into when he levels up. He actually shivered at me. This particular room has given them problems before. He's been at the hotel forever and is the person who had to do a wellness check, where you go into a room to make sure the guest is okay, on that room about 15 years back. They had him do the check because the guest in the room had been down at the desk handing out money to people and it struck them as odd. She had gone back up to the room and shot herself with a small pistol. All of this happened within a period of about 15 minutes according to him, but he said that the room was never the same after that it was just creepy. I still wouldn't consider myself superstitious, but that room is definitely a place that I'd like to avoid at night. I have a creepy hotel story that actually happened about 3 weeks ago. I was on vacation in Santa Cruz with my boyfriend and his family. The first odd thing I noticed was that the side entrance doors to the hotel, that usually require key card access, weren't working or didn't close all the way. But I brushed it off and forgot about it. Fast forward to that evening, all of us were chilling in the indoor pool, having a nice time, and all of a sudden the fire alarm went off. Immediately we all got out, but as soon as we reached the door, it stopped. My boyfriend's brother-in-law decided to check it out at the front desk, who said it was nothing. Again we went back to playing in the pool, and again the alarm went off, and ended 5 seconds later. By now we were kind of annoyed and on alert but went back to relaxing once hotel staff said it was nothing to worry about. Maybe 10 minutes later I happened to glance up at the window that looked out into the front of the hotel and parking lot and saw some dude in baggy clothes and a backpack run up to the window zombie style, and fling that broken outside door open, with no key card. As soon as he got in, he immediately started banging on the windows in the hallway that looked into the pool, screaming, "Get out, come with me, I need your help. My sister is being murdered on the second floor. Help me." And he, again without a key card, opened the door leading to the pool. Luckily my boyfriend's brother-in-law had been in the gym just next door and stopped the guy from entering the pool. He asked what was going on, and the guy screamed back the same thing, then took off running up the stairs. We were all standing in the hallway dripping wet, wondering what the hell was going on when we heard this dude running back and forth on the second floor at lightning speed, screaming stuff we didn't understand, so we noped out. We only had one set of car keys with us, so the men stayed out and told all of us ladies and kids to get in the car. As we were going out to the car, we were parked on the side of the hotel, I heard a tap from above and this crazed dude was smacking the glass of the second-story window, and as soon as I looked up, he did that gesture across his throat like he was going to take our lives. My boyfriend's sister was trying to back out of the spot we were in, and as she was doing so, the next thing we knew this guy was running at us, meat cleaver and barbecue fork in hand, screaming, "Don't let them leave, they have my sister, they're killing her." Luckily the cops had literally just gotten there and my boyfriend's sister was able to drive past them, and they rushed to detain the dude. So, yeah, that's my story of how a nice family vacation got cut short because we got chased through the hotel by some mental, drugged-out psycho. I stayed at the Hotel Galvez in Galveston the night before leaving on a cruise. I am handicapped and my wheelchair wouldn't fit through the bathroom in the room that I had rented for myself and my parents, so I contacted the staff and they were very accommodating and moved me up to the 5th floor. I'm not sure of the room number, as it's been a few years, but I know that it was close to and on the same floor as their notoriously haunted room. That night, there were a lot of noises in the hallway which I assumed were staff and guests working and walking around. I woke up a few times that night to loud crashes, but I passed it all off as the workers in the hallway. My parents were dead asleep the entire time and I just rolled over and went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning to find my wheelchair had been tipped over and was lying on its side, and my shoes that were right next to my bed were in the middle of the room as if someone had put them on and walked off with them, in a stride motion with the left foot in front of the right. I woke my parents up, who were just as baffled as I was, and we took pictures. There's no reason for my parents to fabricate any of this, as they are both very conservative people who do not have any interest in ghosts or that sort of stuff. I grew up in a haunted house and my parents deny it up and down, and have only acknowledged it in conversations a handful of times in my life. I'm not here to say ghosts are real or to argue about it, but what happened definitely happened. My creepiest wasn't a hotel but a friend of a friend's family's vacation house, in the middle of the forest. It had been built and slowly added onto since the 1960s. It was a maze of interconnected sections of rooms, and many of these sections had second levels with more rooms. The furniture and decor gave off a The Shining vibe. The place was too big to go on a full tour and others were unpacking their stuff in their sections, so I didn't get a full layout of it. The section my significant other and I were in was the grandparents' room. It had 2 bathrooms, his and hers closets, and 2 full beds. Probably about 1,300 square feet in total. So we ended up getting to sleep late and it wasn't really creepy, but we heard creaking sounds from upstairs and shrugged it off as another couple had been taking their stuff up a nearby staircase. It wasn't until the next day that I did a perimeter tour and realized that grandparents' room was its own separate building only connected by a hallway, and there was no second level on it. The things in this thread are why my significant other convinced me to get a motorhome for our cross-country, USA, travels. We had done trips by car for several weeks every summer for years, staying in hotels each night along the way. Nothing really weird except magically appearing bugs, fire alarms going off in the room at 2 a.m. that the front desk couldn't turn off, pizza flyer scam handouts that the front desk couldn't stop, the dashcam in the car showing someone trying to break into it overnight, and one really dirty feeling room in Denver that we walked out of without putting our bags down. This was at a hotel in one of the not-so-nice places in Singapore. I can't remember when, but I went back to the hotel. At the elevator, another guy was waiting there, but he didn't push the button, so I had to. At the time, I thought he was a lazy jerk. I entered the lift, and he didn't push a floor either. Years of playing Space Station 13 have given me a healthy case of paranoia towards the actions of others, but I didn't jump to conclusions yet. Maybe he was just on the same floor as me. I stepped out, and the hall split in two. The guy didn't go first. Only after I headed towards my room did he start to follow. Warning bells in my head. This might be how I die. I continued on, and he still followed me down the winding halls, so I took a turn away from my room. He was still following. At that point, I acted like I'd gone the wrong way and rushed to my room. The dude actually yelled behind me as if I did something wrong. I didn't leave until the next morning. Man, that was worrisome. Stayed at a Motel 6 in Marina, California. I wasn't expecting 5-star accommodations because, hey, it's a Motel 6, right? Other than being a little noisy, we slept okay. The next morning, I started packing my stuff. I'm a lung cancer survivor and need special equipment, a CPAP machine, to help me breathe at night. I unplugged my unit and went to disassemble it to be packed away. When I opened it up, it was chock full of roaches. Instead of breathing clean, filtered air, I had been breathing air filtered through roach leg hair. They were even in the tubing and mask. I can't even begin to describe the horror of lifting that lid and seeing those little things scurry out of, and deep into, the inner workings of my equipment. Of course, they were in our bed sheets, too, and our luggage. We emptied every single article from our luggage, killed the roaches that were hiding in the liner, then carefully shook everything out and repacked. The CPAP unit was bagged tightly because I knew there were roaches inside and I didn't want to bring them home. I complained to the manager, who assured me there were no roaches in that room. She was simultaneously sympathetic and incredibly unhelpful. After 3 months of back and forth with Motel 6 corporate offices in Texas, I was refunded for the 2 nights I had stayed there, which is doubly horrifying when I realized that I had been sucking on roach fumes for not 1, but 2 nights. It gets worse, though. My medical equipment was ruined. Phone calls to various repair shops around the country got the same results. We can't fix it, we won't fix it, we don't even want it in the building for fear that our inventory will be infested. Insurance wouldn't pay to replace it because, hey, they bought the first one, so too bad, right? As a result, I was out of pocket several $100s to replace vital equipment that keeps me alive at night because Motel 6 can't keep its premises clean. It wound up costing me nearly $900 for a 2-night stay in a crappy roach motel. For that kind of money, I could have stayed at the Cypress Hotel in Carmel and had money left over for dinner. I don't travel much, and when I do, it's normally for business. I hadn't had a creepy experience until very recently. I was staying at a Hilton in New Jersey. I already wasn't very excited about this trip, but the experience as a whole was a bit off-putting. I arrived on Monday around 10 a.m. I had to go to the client's site almost immediately but wanted to drop my bags off in the room first. I got my key, went up to the room, and tried it, but it didn't work. I tried it again, still nothing. I tried the other one, but it just wasn't unlocking. I heard what I thought was a woman speaking softly inside the room, and I figured that maybe someone was still cleaning it or getting it ready. I was in a bit of a rush so I just picked up my bags and decided to come back later in the evening. When I got back at night, the keys worked fine, and I was finally able to get into the room. I was pretty tired, so I unpacked my things and pretty much went to bed immediately. I'm generally a very deep sleeper and it's hard for anything to wake me up, but around 2 a.m. I woke up to what sounded like someone running up and down the hall in really heavy boots. My room was at the very end of the floor, and it sounded like they would start running, get to my door, and then run back. I was so exhausted at this point I didn't care that much and promptly fell back asleep. The second night I was in the room, I was a bit more awake and decided to play some Hearthstone. I didn't have the volume on or the TV on. The silence in my room was occasionally broken by what I thought was someone saying, "Hello." I couldn't say where exactly it was coming from, and it wasn't very consistent. At first, I thought maybe it was the phone somehow, but no one was on the line. I would occasionally leave the room to head downstairs for a smoke, and I didn't see anyone in the hallway. No one was running in the halls and nothing was unusual for the rest of the night. The "hello" seemed to stop, or at least I stopped noticing it, around 10 p.m. After waking up on Wednesday morning, it looked like someone had moved some of my stuff. I had left my laptop open to provide some ambient light, but it was closed when I woke up. The clothes I had set aside and on top of each other were definitely messed with or moved. It looked like someone had picked up each piece and just kind of dropped it. At that point, I was pretty upset about the situation but didn't want to ask to be placed in a different room, mostly because I was embarrassed that I'd look crazy. Wednesday night, nothing weird happened. Thursday morning I woke up and nothing was out of place. Thursday night, though, was the weirdest. I went to bed around 12 a.m., and it felt like I had gone to sleep pretty quickly. The problem was that it felt like I kept being woken up by something. Throughout the night, I'd fall asleep and suddenly find myself waking up 30 to 45 minutes later. On 2 occasions, I saw what I thought was someone moving from in front of the window, directly across from the bed, and into the hallway towards the bathroom. On Friday I woke up and found that some of the items I had packed away were now outside of my bag. I packed them back up again, got ready, and promptly checked out. Hope I never have to return to that place again.